college sports, college football in full swing. Right now, an American sports fan has literally 4, 5, 6 great sports to choose from. But for Spanish-speaking sports fans, the list is a lot shorter. It's really soccer, football, as everybody says. And after soccer, I think it's combate. So I think what we're seeing this year, the company's evolved to be the number 2 sport for Spanish-speaking sports fans.
You've seen, obviously, the growth of UFC. When you were involved in UFC at those beginning stages, those early stages, how did you feel about just where UFC has gone from when you started, and then obviously after when Dana White got involved and the group got involved with UFC, and to see where it is now? In that, has that helped Combate Americas grow because of what UFC was able to do?
Oh, absolutely, right? John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all ships. So certainly everyone in the MMA business benefited from the huge sale of the UFC to Ari Emanuel. But, Jim, one thing I asked journalists to do, and I know, you work for a very established organization, a very famous organization. I've asked journalists to think about this and to position what I think of as my UFC. And I really hands-on, executive-produced UFC 1 through 12, and I worked on the subsequent 10 more after that. So, I brought in Joe Rogan, I brought in Joe Silva, the legendary matchmaker, helped design the Octagon, really did everything that set the tone. What I ask journalists to focus on when they're thinking of the history of the sport is, you might say the first 12 were the most popular UFCs. Don't forget, back then, before social media, right, in a very different era, in pay-per-view universe of 20 million homes, there's now over 100 million pay-per-view homes. We were doing 300,000 and 400,000 buys on pay-per-view back then, right? If you do that pound-for-pound comparison, that gets the early UFCs to over 1 million buys each in today's world. That's phenomenal. And we did that without any social media, without any internet support, no Facebook, no Twitter, right? We did that almost purely on word of mouth and on some of the TV commercials I put together. So the buy rates of the first 12 UFCs rival what's going on now. And that's very real. And if you think of the things that happened, we were featured in a Russell Crowe, Denzel Washington movie, Virtuosity. We were the final scene of that. I was a cartoon in Mad Magazine, cover story of Mad Magazine. The Friends episode where Jon Favreau, who's playing Courtney Cox's boyfriend, he enters the UFC in that season of Friends. And until the finale episode, the UFC Friends episode was the highest rated episode of Friends. So the pop culture stuff, Brad Pitt, I love Brad Pitt because in an interview he said the only thing he didn't like about Jennifer Aniston was she didn't like the UFC. And we didn't ask him to say that. So I think in some ways Brad and Jennifer broke up because of the UFC. So you've got to see the cultural impact of this, right? Leo DiCaprio's been coming to this. When Leo DiCaprio came to the first UFC, I had to let him in a side door because he wasn't 18 years old yet. He was filming Gilbert Grape. So the UFC I did, right, the first 12 are in many ways a bigger pop culture success than even today. Right? And I know that's a big statement. But it's after John McCain came in and, I left just because I'd become a lightning rod for the controversy. John McCain was beating the crap out of it. And it really became the UFC I think everybody thinks of as pre-Dana. But the truth is, it caught Dana's attention because of the success I drove. So, and I'm honestly, I'm not a megalomaniac. I am not just bragging or being arrogant or, whatever. Everything I said you can check out. That Friends episode speaks for itself. The buy rates speak for themselves. The early UFC was huge. But to your point, the sale of the UFC was a great boon to my company, right? It showed that the sport had arrived, that it was mainstream. I think it also showed that the UFC's focus is on the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, really Anglo-centric countries. Now, the next push is going to be Russia and China. But if you look at it, that paved the way for me to do a Hispanic, Spanish-focused promotion, because South America has really been sort of left alone. Mexico, no real great success there. So I think by putting this together, I think Combate Americas is now the number 2 sport for Spanish-speaking sports fans.
Wow, that's very interesting. And there's so much we could go with, and I want to go here with this. The company UFC was sold to the Furtadas and Dana White, and you mentioned Senator John McCain. I was curious about this. Do you feel that Senator John McCain helped or hurt UFC?
Great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. Look, the first UFC was nuts. We really didn't know what we were doing. But, very quickly, with John McCarthy coming in and looking at it and really changing the structure of it, John McCain lapsed. John McCain came in for the controversy and stayed for the publicity. John McCain kept his attack going even though the UFC had changed. The unified rules were really adapted before Lorenzo and Dana came in. They were in place. We did those with the state of New Jersey. So, John McCain, I think we were already going in that direction, and I would say he definitely was right in his early criticism, but I think by the time we adapted, he still wanted rid of the UFC, and he certainly hurt the UFC I worked on. I think he also set the sport back. That's a great question, Jim. There's a lot of answers to that. But I would say this, look, with the current situation with weight cutting, and we've seen some recent examples of how dangerous that is for the fighters, is doing a no-weight class event really safer than making guys dehydrate themselves to the point where they're having, brain issues? So I think you have to look at this and take out the controversy, take out the hysteria that John McCain really stirred up, and think about it. Do you really want to make the sport safer for athletes? Then that's what we should focus on. So in that way, he did good. And, do you want to just generate controversy, make a name for yourself, and try to establish a national boxing commission? I think that was wrong in what he did there. Look, Senator McCain's a great man. He's a great patriot. He's done a lot for the U.S. I feel very strange criticizing him. But I don't agree with what became a continued attack, I believe, just to keep his name in the papers. And that's really what I think. But again, no disrespect to the senator, to the patriot, to the war hero. But I think in that way, he did hurt